Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's webinar, Why Your Information Isn't Reaching Your Customers and How to Make Sure They Get the Message. My name is Chris Benz. I'm SDI's Vice President of Account Development, and I'll be serving as today's moderator. Today, two SDI information experts will review the common reasons that your customers might not be using your product information, and we'll discuss ways that you can make that information more valuable both for you and for your customers. Today's webinar is the second in SDI's Business of Information series, a series designed to help practitioners, managers, and executives get the greatest value out of product documentation and training development efforts and budgets. SDI is a global provider of cost-effective consulting, services, and solutions for product documentation and training development. I want to introduce our two presenters. First up is Larry Kunz. Larry is a project manager for SDI. He teaches in Duke University's Technical Communication Certificate Program, and he's a fellow of the Society for Technical Communication. Our second presenter is Julio Vazquez. Julio is SDI's Senior Information Architect and is the author of Practical DITA, a DITA primer now in its second edition. Over to you, Larry.
Okay, thanks, Chris, and hello, everyone. Well, why don't your customers read your information? Well, as a matter of fact, they don't read anymore. They need information that's relevant, and they need information in a format that makes sense. That makes sense in terms of who they are, in terms of what they're doing, and in terms of how they're displaying your information. And let's look at each of those 3 points in turn. People don't read anymore. Or more precisely, the traditional model for reading no longer applies. I don't read anymore. And you might call me the classic reader. I majored in English literature in college. I still subscribe to a print newspaper. I'd rather sit down with a good book than do almost anything. Yet when I'm using a product, perhaps your product, I tend to look for quick bits of information, just enough to answer my question and get back to what I was doing. I'm not likely to sit down with the instruction manual if I can find something in an FAQ list or on a forum. And even then, if I display an article and it takes much longer than about one screen, I start to squirm. Your customers are the same as I am. They don't read either. Maybe they're in a hurry. Maybe they've had bad experiences in the past with documentation, not necessarily your documentation, but other documentation, and so they're reluctant to open it up and read it. Increasingly, your customers are accustomed to media that's interactive and online. So even though we see little Amanda here enjoying reading C-Spot Run, most people are more likely to browse search results or scan through forums and FAQs. They want information in small bites. Anything longer than a screen or two is likely to be overlooked. Think about the last time you looked for information about using a product. You probably stopped reading or didn't even start reading if it looked like there was more content than you needed. Or if you saw that the content didn't immediately address the question you had in mind. If your organization is still providing information in the form of, say, chapters and manuals, or in the form of long health topics, you'll find that your customers are increasingly less likely to open it up and read it. Yogi Berra was once asked about a restaurant, and he said, nobody goes there anymore, it's too crowded. In the same way, nobody reads anymore. They're too busy reading short information sources like forums, FAQs, or they're too busy scanning search results. People don't read anymore. Secondly, people want the information that's relevant to them. They don't want or need all of the information about your product. They might say to you, don't tell me how to build a watch, just tell me what time it is. If people think that you're giving them extra stuff that they don't need, they'll probably tune you out. They care about what they think is important. And that may not be the same as what you think is important. To put it more bluntly, your customers care more about themselves than they care about you. And part of the solution, as we're going to see later, is they need to think that you care about them. As a result of this, they may be willing to put more trust in people that they think are just like them. People who write blogs or post on forums might be more trustworthy to some of your customers than the official company documentation. Also, if there's information that you know is important to the use of the product, but your customer isn't convinced of its importance, for example, background information that they might need to make informed decisions, then you have to make a case for getting your customers to read that information. And it's not enough simply to say, this information is important. They have to believe you. We'll talk about static versus dynamic information. Static information, and by that I mean information is published but then not updated, for example, a traditional user's manual, has always had problems. And the sign on the left is an example of static information. It stands there, rain or shine, night or day, summer, winter, fall, spring. It gives information that may be helpful to someone, but it's not particularly relevant. It's certainly not applicable to a specific situation. Static information gets out of date quickly. It's not flexible. It might meet the needs of only a small select group of customers, and it might meet their needs only some of the time. By contrast, more and more we have dynamic information. And the sign on the right is an example of that. It's hard to read what it says. It simply says traffic on Route 126. Slow down. This dynamic information can be updated for the current situation. So it's more likely to be relevant to what a user is doing or what a user needs to know at that time. But it's still limited. This sign can only display a small amount of information. And likewise, dynamic information has advantages, but it's not a be-all and end-all. Simply going to an electronic format in and of itself isn't the solution to all the problems. You have to think about whether the format is compatible with the tools that your customers are using. Some electronic formats are still static. Did you ever see an FAQ list that seemed outdated and irrelevant? I know I have. I like to think of them as SAQs, seldom asked questions. They're questions that I don't really want to know the answer to. Putting information in electronic format isn't the solution to everything. You also have to commit to keeping that information up to date, making sure that the format is still relevant. Today's customer has higher expectations than ever. They're less tolerant of information that's stale and outdated. And they might not even be able to use your information on their smartphone or another output device where they expect to see it.